Today I'd like to talk about humor in music. So just like how we have humor in literature, in the visual arts, and in other types of art, we have humor in music as well. And there's specific examples that I'd like to highlight here. So first of all, if we think of the Baroque period, okay, one of the greatest works of all time really would be the Goldberg Variations by Bach, which was published in 1741. Now, the thing about the Goldberg Variations is that people think, oh, it's such a reverential work and it must be treated as such, right? Which is absolutely correct. However, as with many other works of Bach, what we have with the Goldberg Variations is not something that's strictly sacred, right? Instead, what we have is an integration of the sacred and the secular. So, for example, if we take a look at the 25th variation, which the harpsichordist Wanda Landowska called the Black Pearl. That is absolutely sacred, right? There's no question about that. And in fact, that's one of 3 variations that are in G minor as opposed to G major, right? And then we have this 30th and final variation. Cabbages and turnips have driven me away, right? So clearly this is a folk song that is written from the perspective of a child who's complaining about the vegetables on his plate, right? And in fact, the next line in the folk song is "Het meine Mutter Fleisch gekocht, so wäre ich geblieben," which means if my mother had cooked meat, then I would have stayed, right? So obviously this is something that's comical. And why is it important to know this? Well, it's our job as the performer to portray these sorts of characters convincingly, right? Which is why when people play this variation, and there are people who play this variation like this, right? That's actually not proper, right? So that's one example of humor in music. If we move on to the classical period, one of the better known examples I would say is Haydn's Surprise Symphony, specifically the second movement, which starts out really softly. Everything I just played there gets repeated. But the second time, it's immediately followed by this really loud chord, right? So if you're half asleep in the audience, it's like, boom! It catches you by surprise, right? So obviously Haydn was one of the funniest composers, and then Beethoven, naturally being one of Haydn's students, learned a great deal from him, and also ended up incorporating a great deal of humor in his own works, right? So if we think of Beethoven's piano sonatas, there are certain sonatas that are just almost entirely comical in nature. Opus 31 number 1 would be a good example. Opus 31 number 3 would be another good example, and these are middle period sonatas, right? But what I actually want to do today is focus on the late period sonatas, specifically Opus 110, which is the penultimate sonata. Any scholar studying Beethoven's late period will tell you that at this point in Beethoven's life, it's really important to know that these are the masterpieces that are the most profound, the most intimate, and the most personal, right? And yet, there's still humor even in Beethoven's late period, and this is what I mean. So this Opus 110, right? So we have this first movement, which is very serene, very calm, very meditative. And then the second movement is what sometimes confuses people, right? So, is that a tragic movement or a comic movement? What do you think? Well, the second movement of Opus 109 is indeed tragic. There's no doubt about that. However, the second movement of Opus 110 is actually comic. And if we were a German audience living in Beethoven's time, we would know this because it would be quite apparent that Beethoven is using two contemporary folk songs here, the first of which is Unser Katz hat's Kätzle gehabt. Unser Katz hat's Kätzle gehabt. It's like a tongue twister. But what it means is our cat had kittens, and I believe the next line is 3, 6, and 9, and the one with the white dot on its head, that's mine. Okay, and then the second one, Ich bin lüderlich, du bist lüderlich, wir sind alle lüderlich, which means I'm hedonistic, you're hedonistic, we're all hedonistic. So, and the thing is, not everybody knows that it's based on these folk song elements, right? And I would actually argue that this second movement is serving a crucial function, a crucial role, right? It's serving as comic relief. So just like how we have comic relief in Shakespeare, we have comic relief in Beethoven as well, right? Because what's about to follow in the third movement is absolutely heartbreaking, right? So, what this goes to show is that there are indeed plenty of examples of humor in music. And if we're aware of them, then as a performer, as a listener, that would greatly enhance our ability to enjoy the music.